Thank you for plugging into this Family Life News podcast, streaming issues-driven, family-focused news.
A Christian mail carrier's case is headed to the Supreme Court as religious liberty in the workplace hangs in the balance. You're listening to Faith Under Fire. I'm Abigail Hoffland with Family Life, and today we're speaking to Jeremy Dice of First Liberty Institute about the case involving Gerald Groff, whose religious conviction to honor the Sabbath day prevents him from working on Sundays. His stance was not challenged by his employer, the United States Postal Service, until Amazon purchased a contract from the USPS to deliver mail on Sundays. This violated Mr. Groff's religious convictions, which he noted to his employer.
They initially accommodated him. What they decided would happen is that he would basically work every possible day other than the Lord's Day so that others could have their time off and others could get the overtime for working on Sunday, which they didn't mind having the overtime or the work on Sunday. So it really kind of worked out just fine until the U.S. Postal Service decided they wanted to make an example out of him. And so for about 2 years, they put him through 8 different disciplinary interviews. They gave him a letter of warning, and they suspended him twice, and ultimately became either quit or be fired. And he decided to pull the ripcord and get out of there because life had become just that miserable.
How much power do employers legally have to reject religious exemption requests made by their employees?
Yeah, that's sort of the problem why this case is really important, because back in 1972, the United States Congress passed an amendment to Title VII. That's the part of the Civil Rights Act that governs employment. And they said that an employer is required to accommodate a person's religious beliefs, practices, convictions, unless they can prove by doing so would cause an undue burden to the undue hardship, to the business of the employer. Well, that's really good language, as a matter of fact. But there was a case going on about that same time that was finally resolved some years later. And in a corner of that opinion that is actually non-precedential, it's called dicta in the law. It's something that is persuasive, perhaps, but it is not the actual holding of the court. That court said that if the employer can show it causes a de minimis burden, so just a little bit of a burden, then they don't have to accommodate someone's religious beliefs. Justice Thurgood Marshall, for instance, said that was a tremendous mistake of the court, and that one of the hallmarks of our country of honoring the religious beliefs, especially of minority faiths, had been horribly undermined by that court's decision. And since then, for the last several decades, every lower court, every circuit court across the country has adopted that dicta, that de minimis standard, as their own. And so now all the power really rests in the hands of the employer. And so all we're asking the court to do is to restore that promise of the Congress back in 1972 and use undue hardship to the employer as the standard that ought to be followed in every case. It doesn't guarantee an outcome by any stretch of the imagination. It just simply respects an individual's faith and will have the effect, I think, of restoring religious liberty to the workplace.
In this case, it seems like the hardship fell primarily on Mr. Groff rather than his employer.
I think there was no problem until the U.S. Postal Service decided to make it a problem. Here's how much it was impactful for Gerald. When when this first came about, he was stationed at a post office. He was like maybe a handful of Sundays of work away from gaining the seniority that would have made him be able to be scheduled off on Sundays. If he had just compromised his beliefs 4, 5, 6 times, maybe over the course of a year, he would have been fine. He would have gotten the seniority. He would have had the Sunday off. He would have had a great career. But he couldn't make that compromise. And so what he ended up doing was that post office was requiring Sunday delivery, but one that was further out in the country was not quite yet. So he forfeits all of his seniority to start all over again at a different post office in order to abide by his convictions. Unfortunately, it soon came out to that same post office as well that they had to do Sunday deliveries. They continued to make an example out of him. How did they do that? I mentioned those 8 different pre-disciplinary interviews. Here's how that worked. He would show up to work saying, hey, are you going to work this Sunday? No, I'm not going to do that. All right, you need to go to the Lancaster County mail annex, like the central hub of the mail. It's about an hour's drive away from his post office. He had to leave the post office he was at, go to the carrier annex, have the interview, which lasted about an hour, drive an hour back, fill up his mail cart, and still deliver his mail. And he would get no additional overtime pay for that. He still had to run all the routes and help other employees in their routes as well. What the U.S. Postal Service here did was absolutely wrong. They forced a choice that no employee should ever have to make, which is your career or your faith. In this case, provides the opportunity to restore religious liberty to the workplace.
Our guest today has been Jeremy Dice, Senior Counsel at First Liberty Institute. And I'm Abigail Hoffland. Thank you for tuning in to another Faith Under Fire on Family Life News.